If you've ever heard the famous 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast, the one where Orson Welles supposedly sent America into a screaming, stampeding panic, I need to tell you something. You haven't actually heard it. Not the real one, anyway. For over 50 years, every recording you've ever listened to, every YouTube upload, every radio rerun, every historic broadcast, compilation, came from a single damaged tape sent to the Library of Congress in 1968. And that tape was edited. Pieces were cut out. Lines were trimmed to hide skips in the recording. Whole seconds of silence, silence that actually proves something important, were sliced away and lost. It took until the 2000s for collectors to find the real thing, sitting forgotten in a dead man's record collection. And once historians actually listened to it side by side with the version the whole world thinks is the original, they didn't just find missing audio. They found out that almost everything you've been told about this broadcast, the mass hysteria, the suicides, the traffic jams of fleeing Americans, was never really true at all. So today, we're going to do two things. We're going to reconstruct the real, lost broadcast, minute by minute, exactly as it aired live on October 30th, 1938. And we're going to take apart the 80-year-old myth that grew up around it, and show you who built that myth, and why. Let's start with the mystery itself, the broadcast that vanished. On October 30th, 1938, at 8 p.m. Eastern, CBS aired the 17th episode of the Mercury Theater on the Air, a live, 60-minute dramatic adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, directed and narrated by a 23-year-old Orson Welles, broadcast live from Studio One at 485 Madison Avenue in New York. Here's the part most people don't know, that live performance, as it actually happened in real time, is what archivists call the lost broadcast. The commercial recordings, the radio reruns, the version syndicated for decades, none of it was the unedited original. It all traced back to a single monaural tape transferred to the Library of Congress in 1968, copied from an undocumented source disk. That 1968 tape was missing pieces. The full 15-second silent station identification break was gone. Behind the microphone movements and several of Wells's lines as Professor Pearson were cut. At one point, a damaged section of the master recording caused a skip, and rather than leave it, the editors simply spliced around it, quietly erasing Wells's reading of the line, dim and blue through an April haze. For decades, nobody listening knew a piece of the performance was simply missing. So how do we know what we're missing? Because the true broadcast was never actually lost forever, it was recorded live in 1938 onto 16-inch lacquer-coated discs, originally meant for network reference and regulatory review. In 2001, an unlabeled green Presto Lac-Rec disc from the estate of radio collector Ralph Murcho turned up at auction and sold for $14,000. Then, more recently, a complete 6-disc, 12-side set turned up, a direct contemporary dub of the entire original broadcast. Unedited. Untouched. With the station break intact, the behind-the-scenes cues preserved, and Wells's full, uninterrupted performance restored. For the first time, historians could finally hear the broadcast as 1938 America actually heard it. But here's the question that really matters: why did that 1938 audience react the way they did in the first place? To understand that, we have to go back further, not to the script, but to the psychology of the country that was listening. Why 1938 America was a powder keg? What? This wasn't a broadcast that fooled people in a vacuum. It landed on an audience that had spent nearly a decade being primed for exactly this kind of fear. By the fall of 1938, America had endured almost 10 straight years of the Great Depression, a country living in chronic economic insecurity. Then, just 1 month before the broadcast, the Munich crisis pushed Europe to the edge of war, and millions of Americans had spent September glued to their radios, waiting for the next anxious bulletin from overseas correspondents. People had become trained to expect regular programming to be interrupted by terrifying breaking news. That's the emotional terrain Wells's broadcast walked straight into. And radio itself had earned a kind of trust no other medium had. The year before, in May 1937, the live, raw, emotional reporting of the Hindenburg disaster had shown America just how visceral and real a live radio disaster report could feel. By 1938, the public didn't just listen to radio, they implicitly trusted the voice on the other end of it. Wells's production exploited that trust almost perfectly, whether by accident or design. It mapped a fictional alien invasion directly onto the format Americans trusted the most, the breaking news bulletin. Same urgent tone. Same interrupted music. Same authoritative voice cutting in to say, "We interrupt this program." It wasn't what was said that hit hardest, it was the format it was said in. So with the country primed, and the format perfected, what actually happened, minute by minute, once that broadcast went live? Let's walk through it. The broadcast, minute by minute. The hour was engineered like a slow trapdoor, each segment designed to lower the listener's guard a little further before the floor disappeared completely. It opens innocently, announcer Dan Seymour introduces the show, and Wells reads an updated prologue of Wells's novel, describing humanity being watched by intelligences greater than man's. It sounds like literature. Like a play. Then it pivots. A weather report. Then live dance music from Ramon Requello and his orchestra, supposedly playing at a hotel in New York, actually conducted in studio by Bernard Herrmann. It feels completely normal. Real, even boring. Then, the first interruption. A news flash from Intercontinental Radio News, strange gas explosions observed on Mars, confirmed by Professor Richard Pearson, of Princeton. The music returns, and gets cut off again. This time it's bigger, a massive glowing cylinder has crashed onto a farm in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, a real, specific, ordinary American location chosen deliberately by writer Howard Koch to make the fiction feel geographically real. Then comes the moment that defines the entire broadcast. Reporter Carl Phillips, played by Frank Ray Dick, broadcasts live from the crash site, describing the crowd, the police, the metallic screech of the cylinder's hatch unscrewing. A grotesque, tentacled creature emerges. Phillips's voice rises into genuine panic, deliberately echoing the real, raw panic of Herb Morrison's famous Hindenburg eyewitness report. The Martians unleash a silent heat ray. Phillips screams. And then, dead air. Static. Silence. From there it escalates fast. A state militia commander describes artillery failing completely against the Martian war machines. A Secretary of the Interior, voiced by Kenny Del Mar doing a deliberate impression of President Roosevelt's exact speaking cadence, addresses the nation. Martian tripods wade into the Hudson River, releasing toxic smoke over Manhattan. A lone radio operator on a skyscraper calls into dead static, "Is there anyone on the air? Is there anyone?" Then nothing. Why? That's the moment that, for any listener who'd missed the opening, made this feel completely, terrifyingly real. After a station break, the tone shifts entirely. Wells returns as Professor Pearson, delivering a quiet, devastated monologue from his study, describing a ruined world before revealing the Martians are ultimately destroyed by Earth's bacteria. Wells then steps fully out of character to deliver his Halloween sign-off, comparing the whole thing to dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush to scare the neighbors. This entire production was built in 5 frantic days. Koch finalized the script just 4 days before air, the cast rehearsed only once, and sound effects designer Ora Nichols built the alien hatch sound by literally scraping a jar lid against metal. Now, given how convincing all of that sounds laid out like this, you'd assume the country actually did fall apart that night. Millions fleeing, phone lines jammed, mass hysteria coast to coast. That's the story we've all been told. But when you actually look at the real numbers from that night, the story falls apart almost immediately. Here's the figure that should stop you cold. According to C.E. Hooper's telephone rating service, which measured what Americans were actually listening to that night, the Mercury Theater on the air pulled in a rating of roughly 2%. 2%. That means somewhere around 98% of active radio listeners that night weren't tuned to Wells at all. They were listening to NBC's The Chase and Sanborn Hour, the wildly popular ventriloquist show starring Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. This wasn't a broadcast that gripped the nation in real time. It was a niche program, on the radio, on a Sunday night, competing against one of the most popular shows in America. So where did the millions panicking number actually come from? It traces back to a single source, a 1940 study by psychologist Hadley Cantrill, called The Invasion from Mars. Cantrill estimated about 6 million people heard the broadcast, that 1.7 million believed it was real news, and 1.2 million were frightened or panicked. Cantrill even noted that many of these listeners had tuned in late, missing the opening disclaimer, because NBC happened to cut to a commercial around 8:12 p.m., right when CBS was airing Carl Phillips's terrifying live report from Grover's Mill. Bad timing, not mass hysteria, explains a lot of the confusion. But here's the catch: modern researchers found, Cantrill's study itself was flawed. His sample was statistically skewed toward people who were already prone to anxiety and distress in the first place, which meant his numbers grossly overstated how widespread the panic actually was. And when historians later checked Metropolitan Police, hospital, and morgue records from that night, they found 0 verified deaths connected to the broadcast. No stampedes. No confirmed suicides. None of it holds up. So if the panic wasn't nearly as big as we've always been told, who decided to tell us it was? That's where the story gets genuinely fascinating, because the people who built this myth weren't radio executives. They were radio's biggest rival.